know they start getting a rocking chair by the carpets. They don't have to get all the way down to the carpet.
We'll call the meeting to order. We'll get the secretary to read the minutes from the last meeting. Or no?
They will have it.
Okay, all right. Need to have a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Ms. Ann Marshall, second by Vice Chair Jim. Guess we'll move forward. With the special committees, we're gonna have, we need to have people, I guess we had some stakeholders that we wanted to recognize and to get a little bit more information about charter schools, public schools, to further define our mission. So if we would, we'll proceed with the first on the agenda, which is open enrollment. That's the way we want to go.
So our general counsel has provided a glossary, and then Ms. Barnes is here to talk about the change from ESSA to ESSA.
Okay. Vice Chair, anything?
So Ms. Barnes will be next.
Okay. We'll have Ms. Barnes come up now.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Is this on? My name is Annette Barnes. I'm the Assistant Commissioner for Public School Accountability. It's a pleasure to be here before the committee today. I have provided you with a brief overview and report. It was my understanding that the committee wanted additional information regarding the transitions of the federal accountability under the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, known as ESEA. The most current reauthorization is ESSA, which is Every Student Succeeds Act. What I provided for you was the major reauthorizations of ESEA, the 1965 Act, and the administration, the presidential administration from which those reauthorizations came, and what it meant for Arkansas and what we did during that time. And we are currently looking at the new reauthorization of Every Student Succeeds Act. So you have my report. I hope you had an opportunity to read it. If you have any questions, I'm available.
Does anyone have any questions?
Would you be so kind as to tell us a little bit about how you and those who work with you most directly are going about helping our school leaders and practitioners ease into the differences between the two programs?
Okay, yes ma'am, thank you for your question. What we are currently doing is working through our strategic management plan in order to communicate the most recent revamping of our vision and mission to be more student focused. We do have internal meetings that we are currently lining out to identify how we're going to engage stakeholders, parents. Many of our summer meetings and conferences, we've already been talking about where we're looking to go as an agency and what we want to do under ESSA, but we also are trying to attend as many meetings that the U.S. Department of Education has provided in order for us to be able to communicate and articulate what ESSA really is asking us to do. For the most part, we are looking at trying to be not so heavy on compliance, but to be more mission-minded, to be more holistic in our approach of school improvement planning, so that we can look at systemic ways of addressing the accountability issues. We do not know what the overall regs will yield under ESSA, but we do know that we currently have the opportunity, as all states are being asked, to make public comment on those regulations, and there are some areas that Arkansas is particularly concerned about with respect to subgroup populations, and how we will be looking at whether or not a school should be placed in intensive, comprehensive school improvement or targeted, what that means for our subpopulations, in particular students with disabilities. We're looking at the reporting times and the major changes to the report cards. What we hope to do is line out a timeline of how we as an agency and the various divisions, departments can work throughout the state to garner as much input as possible, to lay out a timeline and meet the required submission windows. So in essence, for the most part, we are currently trying to make sure that we're all on the same page before we start trying to communicate and gather that input. But we have been already doing that through some of the various conferences, committees. So with respect to how my division accountability and the individuals that work in the Division of Accountability, personally, we have been reviewing the regulations. We've been looking at the frequently asked questions, working with the Office of State Support in Washington, D.C., and trying to line out questions that will assist districts in being informed, superintendents, then looking at how these changes will be beneficial or whether they will have a negative effect on the work that they're already doing. We're looking at more ways of allowing students to learn the way they learn in our school system, and demonstrate what success looks like. So we're also looking at trying to align the accountability systems, the state accountability system and the federal accountability system, so that we will have one system for schools and the community and patrons to look at and try to strive for excellence in our state.
Can you give us a sense of the transition timeline? Approximately how long do you think that it's going to take for everybody to pretty much feel their footing under this new law?
For everyone, well, first of all, there is a transition window that's open already with respect to the fact that ESSA was signed in December, and we have until July 1 of 2017 to have the accountability plan in place, basically so that, you know, we will start the 17-18 year with the new accountability under the federal guidelines. We are using this particular time, so in essence, let's say it's July already. We would like to look at trying to meet the first submission window. There are 2 submission windows in order for the Department of Education in Washington to review the information that we're looking at. And so we recognize it will be a very aggressive fall for us because we have a 2017 session. We need to allow time for public comment, allow time for the governor's office to review it prior to submitting, but we would like to submit in March. There's a March window and a July window. School starts in August of 17, and it has to be in place by that time. So everything that we are currently doing and meeting on, we have to do within basically 12 months. that's with approval and everything.
You mentioned public comment that was going to be important to this process, I think particularly on the regs or for whatever aspect, I suppose. How do those fit in to your plans for the transition?
Currently, we are encouraging districts to look at the regs as well. As a state, we do need to submit public comment on those regulations because it will determine what we do, how we do it ultimately. And we have not submitted those, but we have until August 1 to do that. So we have not framed up all of the verbiage and how we need to submit it. But we are encouraging districts to submit. All states are being encouraged in all of our national meetings to submit comment. And we have always encouraged districts to provide us with any concerns they have, and we can incorporate it in our comments. So public comment is actually always open until it closes and the decisions are being made. When we start to work on or get heavily involved in the work for the plan that we will be submitting, we will also have a period of comment with the state. Throughout the state, we will be making presentation and asking for public comment prior to making any changes, prior to sending that to the governor, and then looking at any changes that may be required before we submit to the United States government.
Were you in the education field when No Child Left Behind was instituted?
I was working here. I've been in education for 33 years. I've been at the Arkansas Department of Education for 21 of those. And yes, ma'am, I was involved in education when
I was just going to ask you if this was deja vu all over again. Because this is a public forum, I would like to say that I have had some reflective moments. But I'll bet you learned some lessons the first time that will serve you well this time
I
as well.
certainly hope so. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Barnes.
Thank you. Any other questions?
In terms of some of the discussions you've had moving forward around how to assess when a school is being successful with the subgroup of students who have disabilities, what kind of outcomes or measures have been discussed? I realize no decisions have been made, but just out of curiosity, what sorts of things is the department looking at to help make that assessment?
I don't feel comfortable speaking for the department as a whole right now, simply because I am in the more compliant division, and we do have the Division of Learning Services where our special education unit is. We have, though, been working with districts overall, particularly those who are in our current focus list and where the gaps are large. We have been working heavily in our academically distressed districts, trying to have a more comprehensive approach. Consequently, during our latest reviews, we have asked special education members to accompany the team to do the evaluations so that we can be a little more broadened in our review. Success, we understand, is going to take many shapes and forms. Arkansas has already been poising itself based on the legislation that we have to look at those schools that have a different mission, look at them to see, determine whether or not the measures they put in place, they are accomplishing that. And so when we look at specific needs, we also have to look at how those needs can be met. So again, I can't answer that particular question. There may be someone from a different division that could provide some more information with respect to students with disabilities. But overall, we are reviewing and looking at innovative ways to measure success, and some of that comes through and then what we would need to do is see or determine whether or not our districts who have been looking at these same, let me just say, hurdles, challenges, what they've been doing, how they've determined whether or not it's working. I'd rather just respond in that manner right now. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you all.
All right. Ms. Denise? Irola, yeah.
We're gonna get it one day.
Yes, indeed.
I know. Usually what I'll tell people is think air-ola or arola. It's just one of those names that gets lots of pronunciations, and I'm very used to it. I have for you, I'm not sure if it's an answer to some of the questions and requests that you made the last time. In my opinion, it's typical of most data in that it raises as many questions as it answers. So I agonized over what to put together because there's so much information that can be put together in so many different ways that you can put information together. And you will notice that I didn't spend a lot of time, or you won't see within what I put together statements about what it means, because I think that those inferences are not clear. So let me take you kind of through, I've got the clicker, I've got the power here. What I've put together, why I put it together the way I did. I'm not going to go through all of these slides. It's going to be really, at one point I'm going to stop and say, you all have looked at it. Given what I've said so far, what are your questions? I added a few, I think I added 3 slides based on some new material that I found that I think helps us with it. In putting the information together, you can see from this slide the schools that I did include in this. So basically schools that are south of the river. And I have a caveat I want to put to this. We got started with this discussion about what's school quality. And you guys really challenged us. I think I challenged you to say, what do we mean by an achieving school? And I did that because the old definitions of what an achieving school is are so narrow. And the statement, this is one of my new slides that I put in here, is there's a caveat. What we do in education and what makes a quality school is really multidimensional. And when we get achievement information, it conveys a little about what is going on in a school, but it's not the full story, and it doesn't capture the complexity of it. And I think that what we've been used to getting under the old accountability and under the sense of what was achieving, and the reason I raised those concerns, was more unidimensional than the way that I believe if we're looking towards the future, if we're trying to figure out where do we want to go, let's look more multidimensionally, because certainly the kids that we serve bring that complexity into our lives, and if we can't meet them with some sense of that, then we're not going to be able to solve the problems that we're coming together to try and solve. So we pulled together very quickly some examples of things that you can think about as indicators of a quality school, and you'll see that this idea of measures of success, it's about leadership and change. Today's schools can never stand still. Things are constantly in a flux. And so how do leaders within the schools help to respond to a changing policy world and a changing world of students? So that's part of it. Shared and communicated focus is very much associated with a high quality school. Do we have schools that are focusing very strategically on the needs? And because schools are so different, that focus can be very different from school to school. We have to recognize that. Teaching and learning. Are we focusing on what the students need, or is teaching and learning more about where it says we need to be on day 5 and on what page number? Is it really about the students and helping the students to move from where they are to where they need to go next so that they can be prepared, whether that's moving ahead, catching up, or maintaining a pace that they can to get all that they can out of their education. And then the part that I think we tend to fall to is these measures of success. And right now, the way that accountability has been, the measures of success that are the most public are the measures that are associated with the standardized assessment. So you will see results of that information in the slides that I provided to you that are linked up to the website. But going forward, as we're contemplating where do we see ESSA taking us in terms of opportunity, ESSA provides us with an opportunity to bring in additional measures of success. And you raised a very important question. What does that look like for this group of students? There are still some constraints, and that's why it is so important that if you have a special interest, that you look at what it means for that within the current regulations and make comments. But when we think about measures of success, we want to be broader than just the achievement certainly matters. It does. But it is so much more multidimensional than that. And if we can't look beyond that, we're going to still be standing here 20 years from now having the same conversation. Resources, when we start thinking about all that multidimensionality, resources play a part in that. And there are ways that you can look at how resources are utilized to enable quality schooling for students. Family and community. We were having a discussion today. I drove down from the university this afternoon. We have a summit going on up there, and schools coming together to talk about how do we have student-focused learning? How do we really allow students to have some of the driving force in where they're going and how they're learning? And how do we do that in a way that still results in great results? And what was fascinating about the conversation, what was coming out of it, was that it looks different depending on the community. And so that's why a quality school really has a sense of who their community is and what works within this community. And then how do we take that and have that interplay so that we are capturing that and making sure it's working for the students and for the families. So again, that's broader than just that achieving piece. And then culture and environment. How are we making sure that, for example, when a student walks in, they have a sense of at least one caring adult that they know they can go to. A couple of years ago, our office we had focus groups and interviews with leaders and students and teachers in the priority schools across the state. And what we learned from that experience was how much students want both high expectations, but they also want adults that they can turn to who can support them. They want to know somebody who cares about them is there, and that they can, when they're struggling, they have somebody that can help them through that struggle. So it is really multidimensional. So the data that I'm sharing with you is pretty unidimensional. It's the achievement outcomes. Please keep that in mind as we take a look at it. The charts that I provided to you are looking at 2015 because the request was for, what does it look like right now? And last year is the most recent year. I think that's really relevant because last year was the first year that we took an assessment that assessed on the concept of are students on track to be college and career ready. It was a much more rigorous assessment than in 2014, and so it really gives us a clearer picture of where we are right now. I put before you school performance, but then also school growth scores. And that's part of trying to take achievement and look at it in a more, add some dimension to it. Not only what did they look like in that moment in time, but what did they look like? How did students on average look compared to where they were last year and where we expected them to be? And then we looked at what those two pieces look like together. We also provided for you the subgroup performance, and I should have taken off the adjusted performance because that didn't get, there wasn't enough time to get that in there in the deadline. I gave you some definitions that I don't want to read through, but as we go through, if you have questions, I'm happy to clarify. I also talked a lot about in here some definitions of the growth model, and I do want to spend just a moment to say there are a lot of different ways that you can talk about student growth and achievement. And we have spent years in the education statistics field. The past 10 years, there's been a real focus on what are the different ways you can talk about student growth. What Arkansas used in 2015 is a method that we call a longitudinal student growth model. And the reason for that is it is answering a question that most of us think is a relevant question for our students. How much did you grow compared to how much we thought you would grow, given what we already know about you? And it provides a complementary picture. It gives you more information than just the performance, because it does take into account how you've been doing along the way and tries to statistically set an appropriate expectation, and then looks at whether or not you met that expectation. Then we aggregate that, or we group that together at the school level. And what we're basically doing, a lot of people call these value-added models. There's a lot of misinformation around that term. But simply at the individual student level, when you look at this particular chart, if I have information about how a student performs starting in grade 3, and I'm looking at trying to give some indication of how well they grew from grade 7 to grade 8. Here's an example of it on the screen. You can see that from grade 3 to grade 4, that student made some pretty good gains in achievement. So I don't know if I can, I don't think I can, but if you look at the dots, the first dot is grade 3, the second dot is a little bit steep from grade 3. But from grade 4 to grade 5, that student didn't have so good of a year in terms of achievement gains. If we only looked at how a student did from year to year, we would make some misinterpretations about how they're growing. So wherever we have more information about how a student's been doing, we try to use that information to get a good idea of what we should expect this year. So some students have great years. Some students, this gets to concerns that teachers and parents have raised about, well, you know, this was a really emotional year. I've taught school. I've had students in my class who've had some great years and students that had some not so great years, and good reasons for that, because of what was going on within their own lives or their families' lives. So what this allows us to do is, by using all of that information, we get a sense of where we expect them to be. That's the light blue dot. That's right there above grade 8. If they hit right about that, then we say they grew as much as we expected. If they're above that, we say they grew more than we expected, and if they're below that, they grew less than we expected. And then we take that information for each student and we put it together and we average that. And what happens is it answers the question, on average, did students in this school meet, exceed, or not meet their expected growth and achievement? And because we're looking at this at the school level, we expect most schools to be right there around that average of 0. So if their school average is above, if they have a value-added score that's above 0, that really says that, on average, most of the kids in that school are gaining. And if they're below, that means, on average, most of the students in that school are losing ground. And it's at that group level that we can get the most meaning from this information. So that takes me to these charts, and I know this is so much information, but I did try to give you some tips for how to interpret, how to look at the different parts of the chart and see what it says. So in this particular case, what we did was we plotted the students on the left-hand side is the percent of students that met or exceeded the college and career ready standard, that grade level standard. And then across the horizontal axis is the percentage of poverty. We know there's a relationship. Right? We know that students who are in schools that are higher poverty, that those schools tend to have lower achievement scores. And we wanted to look at that information. You guys wanted to know what's the story for this group of schools. So you've got that, and then you've got a little bit of help with how to interpret that. The right-hand chart says, what does that look like for growth? And although achievement is associated, it has a relationship with poverty, growth does not. It doesn't matter that you're in a school where most of the kids are poor. that growth is not related to poverty. So it's a wonderful complement to the achievement information, and it tells us about the students' efforts collectively that are going on within that school as a result of the education they're receiving. And that takes me to the first chart. And this is where I'll make just a few comments, and then I'll ask you, I want to show you this one. Then I have another chart that I've added that I want to kind of give you a sense of it. So if you look at the left-hand chart, this is performance in math in all the elementary schools, and you can tell there are tons of elementary schools. And that relationship that we just talked about is very evident here. So what was interesting to me is there's only two. We broke it up because you all are interested in whether the school is a charter or a traditional school. There's only 2 charter schools at the elementary level that are south of the river. And what you can see is what's going on in charter and what's going on in traditional schools is pretty much the same. The lower your poverty level, the higher the scores are. The higher your poverty level, the lower the scores are. There are a few schools that are a little bit outside of that. But growth is different. That's that line that goes from left to right downward. That tells us that we have that relationship. But growth is different on the right. On the right, if you're in that the upper half of that chart, it means that on average, the students in your school are growing more than we expected them to grow, which is a really positive thing. And you can see there are schools of all kinds above and below. And part of the question that this takes me to, and this is, I have a love for data that many of you don't share, right?
But I'm amazed by it.
But I'm looking at this and I'm saying, wait a minute, this is pretty cool. We've got schools in here like Terry. They're lower performing, but look at that growth. I mean, I want to know what's going on in that school. What could we be doing? What could we be learning from that school that could help us to help some of these other schools? Because they're in a similar poverty level. And to give you my personal, I don't have a personal bias here. I've actually, as a teacher, when I was in California, I taught in a school that had 0% poverty. 0. My first teaching experience, and my biggest challenge was dealing with the neuroses of the parents because they were more challenging than the students. On the other end of the spectrum was when I taught in Fayetteville in Arkansas. Our school was, when I started there, it was at 75% poverty. When I left, they were at between 92 and 94, and only a third of our kids stayed the whole year. We had 2/3 of our student body that rotated in and out of the school. They were that mobile. So I know what it feels like to be at both ends as a teacher of this poverty spectrum, and I know that growth is possible, and what this does is it shows us that growth is possible. No matter where you are in the poverty continuum, there's a way to make things happen for kids, and if we can sustain that, then perhaps we can see changes in what we're seeing on the left-hand side. That's the information when putting this together that I was hoping to provide you with, is 2 sides or 2 complements to that very unidimensional single status performance. Very quickly, you can see that the story in English language arts is very similar. But let me show you this, because I came across this report. It's from May of 2016, and what I loved about it was that I didn't know somebody else had done those same darn charts that I did, where they plotted the performance of the students on the left, on the y-axis, the vertical axis, and they plotted the poverty on the horizontal axis. And what they were doing, this is Denver. And Denver's been dealing with the same situation. This is happening in other cities. And they've been in an effort to improve what's going on for students across the whole city. And in doing that, they've opened the door to increase charters. They've also created this option for innovation. And then they have their traditional schools. And as I was reading these charts, I was looking and I was thinking, they look just like our performance charts. We're not that dissimilar. The question is, I think that what we need to find out, or at least as I look at the data, my question is, what can we find out about what's already going on? It doesn't seem from these data that anybody at least in our south of the river, has the complete answer. So how do we make this, how do we get more information that can help us understand how we can create these growth results that we're seeing on the right-hand side for all of the schools? And what will that look like? What are the factors that could help impact that? So I'm going to stop right there. I apologize that I didn't have these before. Like I said, I just found this. But you can see that performance pattern exists across all grade levels. And it's not just, it's almost identical to our performance, what I had put together 2 weeks prior before I found that report. So I'm going to stop there and see what questions you have, because you have a lot of people to hear from tonight. And it's really for you to make inferences from and to inform your work when we finish up with all the information you're going to get today. Hopefully by the next time, we can start talking about what are the data questions we really need to be asking, so we can gather that breadth of information that will help you to shape where you go from there. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Questions?
Under the theory that there's no such thing as a dumb question,
There isn't.
who determines what growth is expected of a given student in a given time period, and what standards is that based on?
That's an excellent question, and it's so funny because I hope that I would never come across in such a way that I would make you feel uncomfortable asking a question about the data. The expectation for the student is literally based on their prior performance. So we use statistics to look at how those students are doing in the past. And part of it is the student and how they're doing. Part of it is how all students do, typically. And when you put that information together, every student ends up with their own expectation that's based on where they've been before. It is done statistically, but it really is a reflection of the history of that student. And the more information you have on the student, the more you are able to feel comfortable about where you're predicting or expecting them to be. The second part of your question is, what does that have to do with where they are with standards? When you're using this type of growth model, and particularly at the point that we are, where we just finished year 3 of a testing transition, and we're in a time of transition and flux when it comes to standards and assessment. So we're not making any claims about where these students are in growth relative to standard. We can't at this point. It will be at least 3 years before we can tie back and get a sense of where a particular amount of expected growth needs to be for a student in order for them to make up ground. That will come once we're in a stable assessment for at least 3 years. For now, this gives us a way to look at our students growing and changing in a positive way relative to their own history and expectation. It will never be intended that you take that growth information and use it in isolation from the performance information. I am a huge fan of multiple measures. As a teacher, I never looked at one single piece of information. As a teacher, I taught my students to really think about what are the different places you can get information from that can help you to form an opinion or an understanding. And I think that's the same with where we are in education. Under the old laws, we were forced to look at achievement the way it was put before us, and we were forced to look at growth tied to standard. Those two ways, looking at growth tied to standard is very much related to some of the same factors that achievement is. So we have to have a complementary way to look at how students are doing. We have to have multiple ways of looking at it so that we don't continually say to a student, you're behind, you're failing. Kids need, as much as we do as educators, we all need to have a sense of where we're making changes and whether those changes are having an impact. And then we bring that information together to chart a path for the student.
I've got one other
Sure.
kind of question statement thing, and that is with the measure of poverty. I understand that we're using the qualification for free lunches as a surrogate for a measure of poverty. In our work at MetroPlan, we found that it is the concentration of poverty that starts spinning off all kinds of social ills.
Yes.
And we can map that and have mapped that. We had a HUD housing grant and had identified racially concentrated areas of poverty and neighborhoods within the city that are on the verge of falling into that classification. And what I would like to do in this process is test, based on real students' addresses, where they fall into those racially concentrated areas of poverty, and then compare that with the school lunch surrogate data to see if there's a more fine-grained data that we can apply to the whole issue of poverty in the school district.
And that's an excellent point, and we have a parallel in education statistics that we use. We can look at to what extent do the factors that are nested within the student help explain their achievement, and then we can isolate that from the factors that are outside of the student, the factors that may be school-related, so concentrations of poverty within a particular school. And we can look at how much each of those different components contributes to what we see in an overall score for a student or an overall score for a school. And we did some of this work for Ms. Pfeffer a few years ago for when we were looking at several growth models. And what we found is when you run the multi-level model, anywhere from 70 to about 85% of the variation among students is actually explained by the students themselves. It's factors within the student. That's why this type of growth model is a very equitable model to use if you're going to use it as a complement to achievement. We also determined that there are some school effects that you could look at when you add in those additional layers. You could look at characteristics of the school, as well as you can even look at what's the impact of teachers, and are there differences in terms of how students achieve who have similar score histories based on the differences among teachers. So we could get to that level of data, but for a starting point, we felt like this was a good place to jump off. So that you make a really great point. We do need to not only look at the student, but also look to see what are those factors when they are brought together, impact because they are clustered or they are so focused in a particular area. So that's certainly an area that I think is part of the data questions that'll be good to have in our list.
I have a couple questions. First of which goes back to what the Vice Chair was mentioning about the testing, and I think you mentioned it too, that we're in a 3-year testing change. How does, and I think you were getting to this, and maybe I just didn't understand, but with the different testing, it would be my understanding that would affect how you can determine how someone grows from year to year if there's, the test is different.
Yes.
So how much of an impact does that have? And assuming there was a different test this year, how could we extrapolate what you did this year to some type of evaluation this time next year?
Sure. These methods are, in statistical terms, we would say they're robust to these differences. In other words, this information, the way that the way that longitudinal student growth model is designed, it can handle those changes because it's using the student's own prior history, and it's using information about how students do in general at each of those time points. So it's not tied to the standard. If we were trying to say that these students were growing to a certain degree towards a certain performance standard, we would be in trouble. That's why until we get 3 years of data, we can't bring those two pieces together. So we literally, if you can bring the chart up, just one of those charts up, that is why it is so important to look at achievement and to look at growth. Because if we were to tie it to standard right now, then the chart on the right and the chart on the left would be almost identical. It doesn't give you any more information. And if you're holding schools accountable for that, then you're just double whammy. You know, you're just saying, hey, sorry for who you got. It's who walked through your door. We're gonna get you for that twice. What we're trying to do with this is pull some of that out. Now, it is incumbent upon us as educators to help parents and students understand the difference between what we're doing when we look at achievement and what we're doing when we're looking at growth. And to recognize when the growth is in the direction we want it to be in. There's ways to translate this down to helping students grow and ways to help schools understand when this is a positive and when this is something they should be concerned about. But until we get 3 years of the same test data, we are not going to, we would be irresponsible to try and tie this to the standard. So again, when I look at this, for example, I'm looking at Cloverdale up here in this particular example. This is English Language Arts Performance. They are a school that's in distress, a middle school. They happen to be a charter. They're a conversion charter. When you look at their performance, they're among the lowest performing middle schools. That's out there. Everybody can see that data. But then when you look at their growth, relative to those kids in that school, what they've been doing in the past, and relative to what other kids are doing over time, they're outperforming what we would have expected from them, given what we already knew about them. And that's a positive. Does that mean that they are going to all be at the proficient level next year? No, we can't promise that. What we do know is they're moving in the right direction, so we want them to get that feedback, and we want them to use that feedback to support any strategies that they're using that are helping them to get there, right? Because oftentimes what we do is we go, oh my gosh, look, we're at the bottom again. We got to change what we're doing and try something completely different. And then we never get anywhere because it's based on that standard. It's not based on, how are we doing in terms of what we would expect. Two pieces have to be used together.
That made a lot more sense the second time. I think you said the same thing, though, but thank you. So I blame me for that.
No worries.
My second question, when I looked at these charts, it seems that in middle school and high school, there was a drop-off in the math performance. Am I interpreting your data correctly?
You are, and it is. That's not in Arkansas. That is a universal trend. We see math scores lower given that all states are now pushing towards a college and career ready. It lines up very well with what we might already know if we look at ACT data that we've had for years. Our students in Arkansas struggle with math more than they struggle with the language side of things. That is the case. And it's, as you can see, as you look at middle school to high school, you can tell that there's a lower performance. The further the higher in grade level, the lower the performance seems to be.
In your experience, is there anything tied to that? Is that, I don't want to just accept that that's just how it is.
No, well, that's not how it it could be.
Right.
Right. There are a lot of hypotheses I could have. I will say that when I've investigated this sort of thing before, when our group did the information on the priority schools, and this, in my prior experience, there could be many different reasons why that is happening. This is a single year of data. So this isn't saying that those kids are going down. But if we were to look at the information over time, we would see that pattern, that the higher the grade level, the lower the achievement seems to be. And in studies that look at what are some of the reasons that might be happening, it can really relate to patterns in terms of curricular expectations. Your students come to you 2 and 3 grade levels behind. What are your expectations for that student? If you're teaching in a whole class type environment where you're teaching to the class a particular set of objectives and kids are coming to you behind, the tendency could be to teach to that lower level. So we have to look at many different factors, and some of that information does come back to us, but I think expectation plays a role, and that's certainly what we had heard when we did some of our study of the priority schools, that as you look at what's in front of the students, you have this reality that hits you. I mean, I had this reality when I was teaching up in Fayetteville. I had kids who came to me in 5th grade with a 1st grade reading level. When I was teaching my 5th grade class, we didn't have the ways that we have today to really do more personalized instruction. So we used to try and meet kids' individual needs by dividing them into smaller groups and making sure they could flex through those groups. But I remember having at least 7 different levels of math that I was trying to plan for and teach. Because I had kids in 5th grade who were well above a 7th and 8th grade level, and I had kids who were still struggling to add, 2-digit numbers. And that is a real challenge, and that's one of the things that when we think about one of the reasons I really want to stress the multidimensionality of school quality is the other part of my job that isn't data is getting to go and see schools that are doing things differently for kids. And these schools range, they're not just charter, they're not just traditional schools, it's a mix of all of them. And what I love when I go in those buildings is, that student, and wherever that student is, and wherever that student needs to be, somehow is the focus for every kid. Not the kid who fits the middle, but every kid. And they're doing it, and I want to know how we can do more of that here. And we do have schools that are doing it. We need, those schools need to be talking to other schools, and then they need to be talking with their communities to find out how does that fit. So when I think about things like that, I think about expectation. I think about, as a teacher, as a leader, how am I managing the diversity of learning needs that are in front of me, and what tools do I have to help me make that job manageable so that the student who's well ahead can continue to push the envelope, and the student who's not gets the proper supports. I mean, that's the reality of what most of us face as teachers in the classroom.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's all the questions I have, Chairman.
Does anyone else have any questions around?
Yes, I do. We know that school populations shift, sometimes quite a lot.
Yes.
And dropout rates are certainly not what we would want them to be, particularly at the secondary level. I guess my question is, what are the effects of these shifts and changes, and how do you accommodate them in your longitudinal measurements for a school as a whole?
Right now, the way that model works is a student receives a score for a particular school that can be based on, it can go back through the student's whole history. Now, some of that history is part of another school, granted. I've taught in a school where most of the kids did not remain. The reality of that is fascinating, but right now, what that growth model does is it says, no matter where you were, this is how you were performing. So if I know how you've performed in the past, no matter where you were, and that's helping me to set an expectation for this year, then what does it look like? Did I meet that expectation? So the other thing that we do to mitigate some of the impact of that volatility of students is the scores that I reported in those charts include only the students who are non-mobile. In other words, they've spent at least one academic year in that particular school that it's being attributed to for that particular calculation. But it takes in the student's whole history. And that's, if you can go back, Kim, to that slide that shows the single, I can. Thank you. I had other slides. I wasn't going to try and overwhelm you with this, but if you look at this, if we didn't use as much history as possible, then there is an issue with some growth models in that if you're not using a full history, then the current year's teacher can get very different results from one year to the next because of the volatility. There's not enough stability in what you're doing. What this does is, if you have the information over time, you use the information for the student. So in Arkansas, because we have had such great, and we've just, Arkansas has got good data to work with. We're one of those states that's done a good job with unique identifiers. And you can bring that student's history to the current year, and you can bring that information to bear on the expectation. So a student who the year before had a terrible year, but 2 years before that was really on track, that levels itself out. Imagine them falling behind. I mean, I literally, these trajectories really happen with kids when they're moving. You can get way ahead, experience a move. I moved 9 times as a kid in between kindergarten and 12th grade because my dad was a Marine. And I had a year from 5th to 6th where I lost a tremendous amount of ground. And my 6th grade teacher just made it up in math. I mean, and it was amazing. She just said, you're way far behind, but you're capable and you're going to do this. And we did it. And by the time I got to 7th grade, which was in yet another school, attended 3 schools in 6th grade. By the end of 6th grade, they said, okay, we're going to put you in advanced math because you're at that point. The key piece there was that adults, somehow I was fortunate enough to have adults who recognized that I could do more than I was currently doing and put me in a position to make up that time. The way that this model is designed, it's to take account of that. And so at the 3rd grade level, which is the first grade level that we use growth scores for a school, if a student has a 1st and 2nd grade score, we use that to make their expected growth more stable. There's a big difference when you don't.
Is that, Ms. Ann?
Well, my concern was about not only tracking the individual student, and at one time, you may remember, we were the home, Arkansas, of the migratory student tracking system for the entire migrant population of fruit and crop pickers in the entire United States. And I've heard many a teacher say, I got the best data ever from the migratory tracking system. So I know that it can be done. My question was about if you're reporting these in whole school pictures, how are you accommodating? But it's very reassuring to know that each child is going to be tracked regardless of where that child is.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Arola.
You're welcome.
We're going to go on to our next agenda is consideration of the Little Rock School District Community Advisory Council report.
That was added late.
Okay.
I'll just speak to that. I thought it was important for our group to consider the work that the CAC had done previously. They conducted many meetings and heard from a lot of people within the district, parents, teachers, students. So I just thought it was important for us to have that report. And I will share that I think some of those concerns that were addressed in the report overlap with the purpose of our group, especially as it relates to equity and transparency in the school districts and in the charter schools. So that was on me to add that to the agenda item, and I appreciate that it was. So thank you, Ms. Kaufman.
Next on the agenda, Dr. J. Barth.
Good evening, and I've told several of you individually, thank you for taking on this task, but on behalf of the State Board, I really want to thank all of y'all for the sacrifice you guys are making in terms of providing more insight as the State Board makes decisions down the line, so I want to thank y'all for that. I was asked to speak to the school boundaries, Pulaski County school boundaries issue, and just it's important to note that on January 28th of 2015, the State Board took 3 actions. We, of course, the most high profile, discussed the issue of whether a takeover or whether a state LRSD partnership was the right approach, and we know the answer to that question. Secondly, we created the Civic Community Advisory Committee, and then third, this committee was created to study the appropriate school district lines within Pulaski County, taking into account a variety of things. And that committee was appointed, a 4-member committee that I chaired. We had 5 meetings over the first half of 2015 and issued our report, which you got at the June meeting of the state board, and it was accepted at that time. The major emphasis in our report, of course, was the way in which the state board was constrained dramatically in terms of its ability to change district lines at all related to the Pulaski County Special School District because of a series of court agreements going back to 1989, and that language is laid out in the report. But that's an important, very important thing, is that the state board cannot do anything related to the district lines involving PCSSD, with the exception, of course, of the Jacksonville North Pulaski detachment, which was part of the global settlement. So that was our big, I think, important point. That said, we did think that it was important to go ahead and think about what a future might look like, because our hope that at a point in the future, that constraint will be released. And our group really was guided by 3, I think, important principles in thinking about what that future might look like. First off, I think we were mostly tied to a notion that the best schools are those that have healthy communities attached to them. And while that might be a municipality, and then the lines of that municipality, there are other kinds of communities as well. But when it came to south of the river, our committee was greatly concerned about the impact of a divided Little Rock into 2 districts south of the river, and how that city division was creating some challenges for the school districts south of the river. So first principle is, when possible, communities of interest should be the guide in deciding what line should look like. Secondly, though, we know that certain communities are not in a spot where they can fiscally sustain a district because of their property tax base. And so we were also conscious of the fact that there needed to be fiscal sustainability. And third, our third principle, and this was highlighted, of course, in Mr. Ledbetter's supplemental statement, that it's very important for us to be conscious to the possibility that resegregation into pockets of poverty could occur, and that we have to be conscious of doing all we can to avoid that reality. So those are our 3 grand principles, and they lead to the series of recommendations that are in the report. Since this report, obviously this was a year ago, there have been 2 other big events that have happened. I think by this time we were already getting clear of just how difficult the detachment of Jacksonville North Pulaski would be. In the last year, it's even gotten more obvious how complicated and complex that detachment has been. So I think moving forward, if there is any action in this arena in the future, I think we have to be deeply conscious of the lessons learned from that detachment, and thinking about taking that into account with future rearrangements. Secondly, of course, as you know, the Pulaski County Special School District has been returned to local control, subject to the election of a new school board and the training of that school board. And so that does change the lay of the land here, because at the time this report was written, the Pulaski County Special School District was under the control of the state, and that obviously, because of the distress laws, opened up certain possibilities about the redrawing of lines, assuming there was not the federal court oversight that was in place. So that's kind of a quick overview of how we got to this set of recommendations, and where things have come since then. So I'll open it up for any other questions.
Okay. Any questions?
I just can't help it, guys, sorry. Define community of interest for us, please.
I think it is it is not always identifiable. I think municipalities obviously are the starting point in many cases, but we certainly know that in especially in the rural parts of Pulaski County, that gets very complicated because many of those places are not municipalities. And so I think we always have to, it's going to be a little bit of a balancing act between those municipal lines, but also recognizing there are certain communities, like the Scott community, for instance, which is not a municipality, that also has some sense of a community of interest because of the shared commonalities and the ties of folks living in a place and in a school in a place. So I think there is no rigid definition of a community of interest. I do think that municipal lines are often the starting point and probably the most precise, but we have to recognize that in a county as complex as this, that's not always going to be defining.
What lessons do you think accrue from the challenges that the Jacksonville North Pulaski separation has put into high relief that we need to pay attention to when we're thinking about further divisions?
Well, I think these guys on the front row can probably speak to it more, but it's a laundry list, and I think you can really look to the whole series of agreements that have had to be put forward over the last few months, especially related to property and which district controls the property, staff, and which district has those individuals as their employees. Obviously, all things related to transportation. I mean, there are a lot of different sets of things there, mostly going back to dollars and cents and people. But it's a whole list of things, and I think that those agreements that have been that folks have worked hours and hours and hours on are a starting point to at least identify the checklist of things that have to be taken into account.
Does it begin to temper your enthusiasm for 4 districts beyond in the northern part of the river, north of the river? I'm
Right.
trying to say.
It probably doesn't temper my enthusiasm because I do think that the linkage between a healthy community and a healthy school is a very real one. I think it has to make us realistic that this cannot happen even after federal court oversight is released. This cannot happen quickly. It needs to be it needs to take place in a very methodical way, not rushing to a deadline, so that we get it right, so that teachers and parents and kids have the least disruption in their lives as possible as that transition takes place.
How much thought has been given to just 2 school districts, one north of the river and one south of the river, which has been discussed for years and years?
Exactly. And I think that there were. It is one reason that I went on the state board was resistant to the Jacksonville North Pulaski detachment, because I thought it was probably a little quick for that to happen. I thought we needed to think more holistically about the county as a whole. We know, because that was part of the global settlement, that was a done deal as part of the settlement, and resisting that was not gonna. But it was a worry of mine. I think once that step happened, I think it does get more complicated to stop the creation of other districts north of the river in similar identifiable communities. And I do think that that Sherwood and Maumelle have certainly made their case, and we certainly heard their case. I think it is very worrisome, though. I think we have to be very conscious of what might be the impact on resegregation by divvying up a county into too many separate districts north of the river. I think it's there. I think we have to be conscious of it. But I do think that in many ways the Jacksonville North Pulaski decision created a precedent that whether we love it or not is reality.
Yeah. Precedents come with a price.
Ms. Edwards.
Dr. Barth, thank you so much for being here. I'm a little under the weather, so please excuse my voice. So given the information, particularly with A on south of the river, and some have described, because I know that we're here to talk about the cohesiveness or the moving forward of charter schools and traditional public schools, but given A, south of the river, and the information that you all compiled or that you concluded that having two different school districts undermine the health of the Little Rock School District, and some have noted that charter schools create a parallel school district. So given that conclusion that you all had, how do you see that as it relates to what we're relating to charter schools and having an unhealthy school district by this competition method of the Little Rock School District and the expansion of charter schools within our district?
I mean, I think I voiced some of those concerns on the state board. That said, I think that, we were focusing here on geography, right? More than types of schools. And so our focus was very much on geography. And I do think in some ways that the fact that those charter schools that exist south of the river are open enrollment and obviously have students coming not just from the current LRSD or the current PCSSD, but from various districts. I think in many ways that might make another additional argument for being certain that the traditional public schools in south of the river are at least under the same tent for comparison's sake. So I think our focus was much more on geography and turf rather than and the link to community rather than the type of school that was existing. So I see the parallel. I think we were not thinking in that in those ways.
Mr. Phillips?
Yeah, I have two questions for Dr. Barth. First question is it weird being on the other side?
It's a little strange. Not too scary, but a little strange.
I remember when I used to help my younger sister drive, and I used to have to get in the passenger seat. I was like, oh, this is weird. So I'm sure that's how you feel, but thank you for being here. My more substantive question relates to in the report, it talks about efficiency. And you mentioned earlier about dollars and cents. Were there any reports or data collected on how efficient one district could be?
We did not, because of the limited time we were working under, we did not get to that point in the process. We obviously looked a lot at tax revenue data, thanks to data that MetroPlan, Jim and the folks at MetroPlan gathered for us. So we were able to look at kind of the input side. We were not at a point where we really were able to look at the budgets of the districts. But it is very clear that that especially when it comes to transportation and possibly some other services that could be shared across the districts, there could be some savings. And that was, of course, one of our recommendations is that that we could move forward with the possibility of efficiencies even without the kind of mergers that we're talking about, whether that is through a co-op, an educational co-op, which most of the both LRSD and PCSSD are not members of, but the creation of an educational co-op, the joining of co-ops, so that there could be some of those sharing of resources, both in terms of personnel, but then also in terms of some of those costs of educating kids.
Thank you. No further questions, Chairman.
Any other questions?
Yep.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you, Dr.
Thanks,
Parker.
guys.
We'll move to Superintendent Baker Kurz.
Take my watch out, or at least my phone. I'm going to speak no longer than 5 minutes. and then I'll be available for your questions, and I don't mind being interrupted. I'm disregarding my PowerPoint presentation, which I had prepared. I think it's probably superfluous at this point. I'm going to primarily disregard my prepared remarks, which are extensive, because I think it's primarily superfluous at this point. And I say all this because I think we've spent a fair amount of time already today on the wrong topic. In my experience, which is limited in school circumstances, but perhaps very broad in other worldly things such as controversy, the simple way to avoid the real issue is to delve into the detail. If you want to understand what an elephant looks like, you don't run up and look at a square inch of it. You step back from it, you analyze it from a distance, and then you slowly move up and start to begin to understand what this thing is really all about. So, and I really appreciate my alma mater statistics. Most of them are pretty good. And I love data-driven decision-making. Many of you may know that I actually presented that same information in a different format on March the 31st, which clearly shows that when you go to value add and you adjust for poverty, Little Rock School District excels. It excels, and that's a plain fact. If you look at all the slides which were prepared, on the charts at least, you'll look, Little Rock School District schools are to the upper right, above the line, and charters typically are not. The only charter that was really out of line was Cloverdale, and I must tell you, it's a Little Rock school. It operates just like our other middle schools. It has a charter by name, but I'm so proud to see it there. So what I think we have to decide is, where does Little Rock School District fit in? And you say, what about collaboration and cooperation? I'm all about that. I'd like to see a show of hands of anyone in the room who says they don't like collaboration. Let's don't even, everybody loves it. And you may recall, I actually asked for it on March the 31st. I presented very similar data as we've seen already here tonight, and I suggested that the prudent thing to do at that point in time was to begin a process of collaboration, not make these massive charter expansions that evening, but rather let's stop, let's collaborate, let's try to see how we can work together. And you may recall how that vote was taken. So if we're going to make data-driven decisions, then we had a chance then to make one. It's too late to argue that point. But now I think we have to ask ourselves, are we in a data-driven environment or are we in a political environment? I think you have to ask yourself that very candidly. You were organized by a 5-3 vote. There have been major changes in the State Board of Education, and you're purely an advisory group. I'm a lame duck superintendent. I have less than, depending on when my tenure ends, if it's midnight tomorrow night, I'm somewhat short of 36 hours. But I love this school district and I love this community, and I want to see this community succeed. If I thought charter schools were the answer and that they were innovative and doing innovative things and were open and clearly establishing schools that reached every child, I would support them. But I never envisioned, and the statute doesn't allow for these massive charter school districts. So I think it's incumbent upon us as a community to determine if we believed in competition, which we say we do, competition and choice. That's the governor's mantra, and I respect the governor very much. That's the commissioner's statement. He made that same statement in front of the Little Rock City Board. It's clearly the will of this board, the State Board of Education, not you in particular, but the State Board of Education. They've made a determination. That's the direction in which they wish to go. The University of Arkansas Division of Educational Policy clearly has that leaning. They may not admit it tonight. I'm not asking them to, but my perception at least is that they believe in a chartered environment and are supported by those that believe the same thing. And likewise, the Walton Foundation, which is a very powerful group, is committed $250 million to a loan fund of some sort. So I see the political realm in which we operate, but I also see the reality by the data you've seen today, by the data I introduced before. Little Rock is the leader in student growth. If you adjust for poverty, we're the leader in student achievement. And we're also the leader in diversity, and we're also an organization that believes what we say when we believe every child can learn. We don't turn kids away. I'm not going to delve into, I'm about out of time and I want to take your questions, but if you look at the charts that were presented tonight by the U of A, the most telling chart is the one about English language learners and student achievement at the high school level. I'm not going to bring it up, but if you look carefully at the chart, you'll see that the charter schools have no English language learners. no English language learners. That's stunning. That's the chart you need to look at. That's the one that shows you who's enrolling kids of great need and who's doing what they can to help kids who need the most help. So I'm not an educator, I don't profess to be, but I can tell you this, for the last 420 days, Little Rock School District has employed the best practices we knew how to employ. We empowered our people and we worked terribly hard, and we've got good, solid results. If you look at our Iowa test results, they're better than anybody else's in terms of their growth. If you look at what we've done in pre-K, it's marvelous. Our pre-K results are out, and they're just absolutely stunning. And we were more than happy to collaborate. If that's what people want to do today, we'll never turn our back on collaboration. I'll be gone. But the real question is that what we really want to do? Is competition and choice what we're all about? Because that's where we were on March the 31st. That's really where we were then. And then 14 days later, on April the 14th, April the 13th, I was non-renewed. April the 14th, the following day, this group was formed. And I would love to collaborate and cooperate, but I think we have to collaborate and cooperate from the standpoint of Little Rock School District as the leader in student growth, as the leader in diversity, and as an organization that values those things very much and will never compromise. And the other thing we won't compromise as long as I'm in this community, if I have any say-so, which will be limited, is that we won't compromise on openness. If we're going to build a school, we're going to build it with public money, just like a charter. Charters use public money to pay for their schools, but we don't know who the landlords are. We don't know what the terms of those leases are. We don't know what the rates of return are. We don't see those things. I'm not opposed to charters. I'm not opposed to people building more schools. This state board authorized huge construction projects on March the 31st, but I'm just telling you, let's air it all out. Let's make it open, and let's make your group a powerful group that has a point of view and insists on the things that make a difference. Whatever I'll stand by the work of this body. I know many of you personally, and I thank you for your service, but it's got to be real. It's got to be real. And with that, I'll take your questions if you happen to have some.
I'll start. First, let me speak for myself, and I think a lot of others, in thanking you for your service this past year. I think you've done an extraordinary job in a very tough situation. And I hope that Mr. Poore finds a way to keep you involved and trying to solve some of the problems that not only the school district but the community at large faces. I'm sorry we didn't have enough time for your full presentation. I did read what you had submitted to the board earlier. If there is a competitive environment between charters and traditional public education, both to stimulate reform and innovation, and one of the things that you're competing for is students, because students equal dollars. It occurs to me that in a zero-sum game, there's a tipping point someplace between the number of charter school seats and the fiscal viability of the traditional public school systems. Am I correct in that, in attributing that to? And if I recall your comments, you believe that we have passed that tipping point. Is that correct? Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, I can tell you what the data will reflect. With a E-STEM expansion of over 5,000 students located within the footprint of Little Rock School District, that's astounding. I mean, have we gotten used to that yet? 5,000 students, most of whom come from Little Rock and the surrounding school districts. They're not all Little Rock residents. Will be attending a school with duplicate facilities, duplicate administrations. It'll be about the 15th largest school district in the state. We spent so much time trying to consolidate school districts, and now we wanted competition and choice, which I love competition. But that's an astounding number. And when you take those kids out of the Little Rock School District with all the infrastructure that we currently have and the financial challenges that we currently have, it makes it almost impossible to balance a budget. It's $6 to $8 million, depending on where these students come from. But let's just say 2,000 of the kids that are expanded come out of Little Rock School District. That's well over $10 million. So $10 million is a lot of money to cut from a budget where you've already got to cut $37 million. That didn't carry the day. It was a simple idea of about a waiting list and people who wanted to go to charters. I respect those parents, but we are in a crisis situation, and Little Rock has turned to. I'm so proud of the people, and thank you for your kind words about my work. It's been a labor of love for me. I've been richly blessed by this opportunity. But I will say that you cannot continue to balance the political muscle of so many powerful people on the backs of Little Rock School District. Little Rock School District has more poor kids than everybody else put together. And if you want to help poor kids, come to the Little Rock School District. You don't have to open a charter to make a difference. We do better than Little Rock Prep. We do better than Covenant Keepers. We do better. We got taken over because we have schools that do better than those two schools. And instead of those schools being shut down, if competition matters, if we're going to live by the sword, we die by it, if that's the truth, then why didn't we shut those schools down? The reason we didn't is because the political situation did not allow that to occur. And that's, if we're going to have competition and choice, let's just get it on. I'm used to it. If we're going to have collaboration, we've missed our chance. Frankly, we've missed our chance. And you have to decide whether the work that you intend to do will make a difference. And I certainly will support you in everything you do. I have great respect for you.
Mr. Phillips.
As a lawyer in law school, I remember doing research and trying to understand what statute mean and what cases mean. Sometimes you go back to the legislative history and you see where things started. And when you go back up until March 31st, I think you and others were asking for a plan, and that's what I think you're mentioning now, some type of collaboration. And I understand that you're saying now that maybe we're too far past that point. But I understand the purpose of our group. What's part of our group is to try to address that plan. So assuming, and I think you've been pretty clear that we're too far past that point, but assuming that we're not too far past that point, assuming that there is work that we can do going forward, other than the issues of transparency as it relates to financial issues, what other issues needs to be on the table for us to consider if we're trying to figure out some type of plan going forward?
Well, I could give you a number of things. For example, we have a high-performing school called Carver. It's under-enrolled. There are empty seats at Carver. If there are kids who want to go to an environment that's highly academically successful with world-class teachers in a beautiful little school, it's already built, go to Carver. If you're on a waiting list and you want to go to a school, go to Carver. This board or the state board could say, we don't care where you live, you can go to Carver. But instead of doing that, what did we do? We acquired expensive real estate next to the Heifer Project International, and you're going to spend $1,500,000 a year of taxpayer money building a new building within a stone's throw of Carver. That's the sort of thing, if you wanted to collaborate, golly, wasn't that an opportunity? We got a building already there with a great principal, high-achieving school, lots of kids in need and kids of poverty. It's a great opportunity for people to get into their community and learn who they live with and pick up the whole community. And it's a high-achieving school. But instead of doing that, what did we do? We didn't collaborate. We pushed on. We fought on. We hard-headedly moved forward to waste public money. Now we have extra seats, thousands of extra seats in East Little Rock. We're 46% reduction in school-age kids in the last 10 years, I think. I've got the data. Don't quote that in the paper, but that's the kind of thing you could do. I mean, why couldn't you do that? I could go on and on and on. If we're going to build a new a school out in Southwest Little Rock, and it's going to be neat, it's going to be amazing, do we need another high school at the University of Arkansas? Built on a bargain basis, the U of A giving them a cheap run at things. Nobody's doing that for us. If the Walton Foundation wants to give money to people to help poor kids, you don't have to go to Detroit or wherever, 19 schools or 19 cities. And you don't have to facilitate that by cheap loans to people. There's no givvies here. $250 million loan program is different. So I'm saying there's thousands of opportunities, but that was all foreclosed, Antoine. That was foreclosed with the very same data you just looked at. The very same data you just looked at, I provided, and it didn't make any difference. So I wonder what difference it makes now. I want the truth-telling to start, and I want it to be honest and forthright, but people of goodwill. And I'm not angry. Do I sound angry? I'm not. If a soft word will turn it away wrath, I want to be heard to utter a soft word. I love this town, and I love these kids, and it's too important to fight about. And there's no opportunity in charters that we don't already have. Please understand, you've seen the data. Just look at those slides. Who grows the kids? And the kids that they take from us, I showed you. It's 81.9% of the kids who left Little Rock School District. Actually, were in our district and left were proficient and advanced in literacy. 77 were proficient and advanced in math. People aren't leaving our school district because they're failing. They're leaving because they want a different opportunity in a different setting. And the state owes nobody that.
Thank you, Mr. Garrett.
Any other questions?
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Future Superintendent, Mr. Michael Poole.
Good evening. Thank you for this opportunity to be in front of all of you. And I haven't met each of you, but I am looking forward to being a part of this community and working with you together. My view for this region, and you can see that my presentation is titled Effective Schools and School Districts. Really, in some ways, it complements the report you received earlier from Ms. Ariola of the reality of our world, the research that's kind of behind it, and then the ties back into our community about how to deal with that research. I think one of the first things that you need to understand is that we live in a much different world than how we all grew up in terms of education. I love this slide, and I used it with the state board just recently, because really, if you look at the left, that probably was how I grew up. Everybody got in a line, and you tried to make sure that you followed every single element of what the teacher expected, and everyone just marched along. Our world is so much different now in terms of the needs of our students. When you look at special needs, exceptional students, when you look at ESL language type students, there's a variety of needs that are out there, and the delivery that needs to step forward right now in education has to look different than what we've delivered in our past. So this is a very good slide, and some of you might think, oh my gosh, that thing on the right, that looks a little scary. That looks a little out of control. But I'm telling you, that is our world right now in education, and that's okay, because it also represents, if you look at that right, another visual that I like is it's engaged students that are active, and that's what we need to strive for in terms of our delivery. So just a couple Yogi Berra quotes. When you come to a fork in the road, take it. Not a bad thing to think about. I said never most of the things I said. I never said most of the things I said. That's kind of an interesting one for us as leaders as we try to work on these things and have a community look at every word that we propose and present. And the final one is, and I can't see it because, thank you, the future ain't what it used to be. I like all those in terms of representing a little bit of where we're at right now. This next slide is all about school effect, and it comes from work by Robert Marzano and also Tim Waters. And it was a part of an effort called Balanced Leadership. I'm going to go ahead and add and put the whole slide up for you right now. It's an interesting set of data because what it really represents is when you say 50th percentile, if you can think of it in the sense of a school child coming in as a third grader, if you end up at the 50th percentile at the end of that year, basically what you've got is a year's worth of growth. And if you look at this thing and just start to examine how the data works on it, what it says is that an average school, average teacher, if you're doing things basically right, you're going to move forward with a year's worth of growth. Now, the most amazing thing about this slide is that if you look at the one that says a highly effective teacher, yet a highly ineffective school, and that's about the fourth bar down, even if the school is ineffective, there's disruptions, there is not good professional learning communities, the quality of a great teacher always wins out. A great teacher always gets you that more than just a year's worth of growth. It exceeds it. And of course, what we want to wrap our heads around is trying to look at highly effective school, highly effective teacher. Now that student that comes in actually has the chance to get more than a year's worth of growth. So how do we achieve that in what we can all do? And I'm going to go ahead and throw up all of these bullets and then just talk about it in terms of how I view our area as a part of this little, all around our Little Rock area in the south of the river. Well, if you think of it in terms of just instruction, and one of the things that I think this group can advocate for is access to high-quality preschool programs. That's something that must be done, and we have really great programs in the Little Rock School, and the results, and something that I'm going to deliver to the Clinton group on Tuesday will be some of the results about our preschool program. But we don't have enough slots available, and I would guess that the same could be said by Mr. Guest, that he would appreciate more slots in preschool. What can we do in terms of creating more instructional leaders? Well, if you think about it, there's so many things that are shortages, and I think many of you have heard that I'm very much a proponent of career development centers. Career development centers can happen at each one of our high schools, and one of the aspects that probably needs to be a part of each high school is a career development component of developing teachers, a teacher cadet program. That's actually a name of the type of delivery. Because we have a workforce shortage, and one of the best things that we can do to engage our young people is to have them involved in becoming teachers. Also imagine them then being able to be used to support interventions with younger kids. This is something that we need to think about. We also need to think about helping adults that are more well into their career, but now are saying, I want to make a shift and I want to go into the profession of being teachers. And I think there's an opportunity to do that with the Teacher Association and also the college down here with UALR. Culture and climate is a huge thing in terms of school effects and trying to make things better. One of the things that we have throughout this district in Little Rock, as I've got to talk to principals, Mr. Kurz could back this up, is you look at the poverty rate, how many students are on free and reduced lunch. And it's very rare when I talk to a principal and ask them about their demographics that their free and reduced lunch is under 85%. That's the makeup of our community right now. How can we support then a district that has that type of poverty? Parents that want to be engaged with their kids but often are working. Parents that sometimes are single parents that have needs beyond the schoolhouse that have to be addressed. That's a key component. I don't have enough time to dive into all the things that could be done, but I can let your imagination run wild with that. Utilization of resources is obviously very, very important. I'll come back to preschool again because I want to continue to hammer that as one of the key things that I think we need to do within this area is continue to advance preschool options and opportunities. I also want to share that one of the things that Mr. Curris and Kelsey Bailey have provided me as a part of understanding this district is the amount of money that we use within the different schools. And one of the things I've most been impressed about with Little Rock School District is money is going to where needs are the highest. That's important that we're able to always keep that in mind of where our resources are going. I agree wholeheartedly with the concept of a stronger community, and for the education world, stronger community, one of the things that I'm a little bit shocked about as a new person coming into this community is that we do not have a co-op that we are participating in. Now, I personally can do something about that, but you also could be advocates for us to be able to have a co-op that is in existence to support this entire region, because right now, as I understand it, some of the superintendents are going to a variety of different places to get support and help, or possibly aren't even utilizing a co-op. Finally, adult engagement. When you look at adult engagement, that's you right now. Helping, one of the things that we need to look at is what are the things that we can move forward in terms of creating access for adults to truly be invested in our school system. And I think there's something for everyone, whether it's reading to a child or mentoring or actually just getting out to vote. That has to be done in order for this whole region to continue to move forward and do the very best we can for every single child that we get to have interaction with. To wrap up, and my final slide, and then open up question, just as my contact information for you, is I do believe that we can collaborate, that we do have an opportunity right now to do a lot of things to work together. I come at that maybe from a little bit different angle than others. In Bentonville, we publicized other school districts' course offerings because we weren't going to be able to offer welding, but we knew students had to have that. We knew that there were things that we could do together in terms of working with across districts to improve, I guess, access and then also performance by working together. And I look forward to that opportunity in this community and hope that I'll always be a person that will be championing collaboration and that will be looked at as a person that actually made those things a reality. I appreciate your time tonight, and I'll address any questions that you may have of me.
Mr. Phillips, did you have a question? Okay. Chair.
Welcome to Little Rock.
Thank you.
Let me share with you one of my favorite quotes in this time of a global economy. It's from not Mark Twain. I forget, the fellow from Oklahoma. Bob Dylan? Huh?
Will Rogers?
Will Rogers. Even if you're on the right track, you're going to get run over if you're standing still. So throw that one in there. I use that all the time. One of the things that Commissioner Key's prepared to do is spend a bunch of money to hire a researcher to research a bunch of stuff for us. And my question to you is, what topics are important to you? And this may be unfair, and feel free to come back later with more information. Do you believe that we should ask a researcher to provide us information on?
Well, I think that, one of the key discussions that goes on right now is that, we have, there's a history within the community of just where people feel about how things have gone within the school system, and then why they make certain choices that they do with either choosing to keep their kids in the school district or going to someplace else. I think one of the key things is really understanding what parents are saying are most important to them. Parents have to be a key voice in terms of being able to understand what it is that they're wanting. Now, some of that also then falls back, once that data comes, it allows us to respond to it. Because I think Mr. Curtis is right in the sense of sharing that, I want to clearly point this out, that things that are available in the Little Rock School District right now, I think can meet those needs. But are the parents aware of that? Are we aware of what those needs are, what they're saying that they're trying to gravitate towards? That'd be one example that just comes immediately to my mind.
And as you have some time to think on it, if there were anything else that occurs to you, please let us know.
Thank you.
Ms. Ann.
I'll try to say this quote correctly. As a student of history, I remember, we live in the present, we dream of the future, and we learn eternal truths from the past. So this might be an encouraging word for you. I do agree that an educational cooperative is a mighty great tool in many educational and just coalition ways. At one time, the 3 superintendents for the 3 local school districts in this county did have an education co-op in the early 90s. The 3 of them, wanted it done away with. So one of the things to take, I think, encouragement from is it can happen. On the other hand, if we have 4 new school districts and that's 4 new superintendents for you to deal with, that might be a bit of an impediment. But I certainly do agree that an educational co-op is a big plus, and I hope you get it.
I like the challenges of having Mr. Wood, Mr. Guess, Mr. Rogers, and myself all working together, trying to come up with things. And one of the benefits of a co-op that just kind of in back of our heads ought to think about with collaboration is that oftentimes the co-op, if it's set up, then has the way to create a fiscal management for the partnerships that can exist to help us with a variety of different things. So if we utilize that, there is an opportunity there if we can create an agreement amongst the 4 superintendents.
Well, I just want to be clear, I'm not talking about the 4 current players. I'm talking about if north of the river is subdivided into other school districts. I'm not saying that it can't be done, I'm just saying that it can be a challenge.
Yes,
but I
ma'am.
hope that it's a challenge that you work through.
Thank you.
Ms. Edwards.
Hello, Mr. Forrest. Good to see you, and thank you for coming. You mentioned earlier that when you were in Bentonville, that the public school and the charter school would advertise, or they would help each other by letting students know and families know about the curriculum. Did I hear you correctly?
No, that was
Okay.
actually with public schools cooperating with each other to support each other in terms of offerings that we may be able to do at
Okay.
one campus. So on the other side of it, for students that in Gravette or Gentry, we were attracting them into some of our things that were the high-tech computer science type programs and allowing them to come over. Or we also worked with construction trade with the entire Benton school Benton County, all the districts work together to come up with ways to advance construction trade.
But were those schools competing with one another, or were they seen as competition?
We viewed it as support to kids, and that was our priority. What can we do to make things better for students and utilize our resources effectively?
Correct. But so I guess what I'm asking is, were the individual school districts setting up a competition? So were there ever conversations in the public saying that a Gentry school was competing against Bentonville, or competing for those students? Was it ever set up in public in conversation that it was competing against one another?
No, and to the credit of educators, when educators get together, I think we can find ways that allows us to be able to utilize resources effectively without stealing each other's children, to make sure that we just deliver, quality programs and opportunities.
And so I think that's what I'm getting to, because I'm thinking about what our charge is, and I continue to go back to what our charge is, and creating an environment, from my understanding, an environment in which public schools, traditional public schools, and public charter schools can work together, right? So that's what we've been told, and those are the things that, continue to come along. But this just continues to make me think about Burger King and McDonald's, right? So just bear with me on this analogy. So to me, it seems as though we are asking competitors, because of the way that it continues to be put in the public realm, that these two traditional public schools and public charter schools are competing against one another because we're dealing with competition and choice and who's better. And so it would seem to me that it's like asking a Walmart and a Target to advertise one another's plans, or as if we're saying, hey, Burger King and McDonald's, let's just work together going down the street, although we are competing for the exact same dollars and the exact same person. How does that exist? Transparently, how does that exist? And truthfully, how does that exist? And really, is that a reasonable task for us, in your eyes, moving forward with two competing districts, in a sense?
I think that's a very challenging question that I don't know if I have a very complete answer for you, because I don't see how your group, within the confines of the time that you have, that you can pull something like that off. I do think that there are models throughout the country that we ought to consider and look at to see whether or not they're appropriate for our setting right here. So, the number one thing that I know I personally am invested in right now is trying to make sure that every single day we're getting better in Little Rock School District and serving our students the very best. And so, that's the other challenge, is that we're so deeply rooted in our own individual school districts, and I'm sure the charters would say the same thing, of here's what we're going to go do to impact kids on a day-to-day basis, that it's kind of hard to fathom how to branch out into these other areas of whether we support each other or not, because our time is so spent on trying to make an impact each day with our own facilities, our own kids, our own teachers.
But so thinking about what you, excuse me, Chair, am I good? Okay. So thinking about what you just said on a daily basis, because without using the word competition, that's what it bears out, right? And so if you think of a sports analogy, there's still something about good sportsmanship, right? And it seems to me that as we continue to compete, and we are fierce competitors, excuse me, English teachers in the room, fierce competitors, are we still holding true to good sportsmanship when, as soon-to-be former Superintendent Curtis just laid out, and I didn't really realize this, so excuse my ignorance, about Carver and being a stone's throw from this new campus, are we really being or having good sportsmanship as we move forward and doing what's best for students instead of what's best for adults?
I don't know if, in some ways, that's a little bit of a rhetorical question, but the other part of
It could be a loaded question, so let me say I
Definitely
also have a
loaded.
law degree, so I could be loaded and leading. But I am wondering, because I do think, and as much as I want to believe that we were put together to sincerely think about this district moving forward in the way that the environment that has been created for us to move forward. If it is good faith movement, or is it a farce or a prologue to a farce, as James Madison would say? Is it really sincere? And I mean, to be quite honest with you, my child's birthday is today. And so if we're not moving in a method that is fair, sportsmanship-like, then is there a point for us to really be here? And I'm just being honest in asking that.
And Ms. Edwards, one of the things how you just shared that, I think it goes back into the formation of the study that Mr. McKenzie initially brought up, of what questions that you want to have presented in that study, because I think that could be the way that enlightens you as to, at least as an individual and then as a board, collective group of folks, collective group of leaders, as to whether or not this is work that needs to continue to be dived into.
Mr. Phillips.
One last thing. But if the decisions have already been made, is there a point for research? And I'm not unloading these on you, but these things are coming to me, and when they come, I just have to go ahead and ask. So if these movements and research, if this research is really helping us to seek a solution, or is it just to pass by time as other plans are being completed, and so that's just something for everybody watching in the audience or whatever to consider, as I consider, and I tend to try to be very transparent and forthcoming in the way that I'm thinking about doing this.
Mr. Phillips.
Chairman, I'd like to respond to Board Member Edwards and what she just said, and not necessarily directed at Mr. Poore, because I don't know if these issues are directed to him. But since we're quoting folks,
I just want you to know you all elevated it from Yogi Berra to we have James Madison. We've totally blown my quota.
well, I don't know if this is going to continue in the elevation,
Jay-Z.
but it's going to be Jay-Z quote. And anybody who knows me know I quote Jay-Z all the time. But one of his lyrics says, "Much bigger issues in the world I know, but first I got to take care of the world I know." And the world I know is the Little Rock School District. And the world I know right now is this board. And in light of what Ms. Edwards said, I completely agree that everything that we're doing, that this plan that I was vocal about before and up until March 31st that need to happen, if it's not me personally responding to us as the board because we don't meet otherwise, if there is a farce, then I don't want to be here. So I'm here in good faith with the belief that the things that we know, the world that we know, the Little Rock School District, the south of the river as we know it today, that there's a chance for us to do something to create some type of, whether it's a plan, collaboration, whatever, I don't care about the terminology, but whatever it is, I'm hopeful that there is something. Because like you, I don't have any kids, so I don't have a kid's birthday today, but there are other things that I think we all could be doing. So I'm here in good faith to my board members that with the belief, with the trust of the department, that whatever we come up with through this research, through these meetings, will be taken seriously and be considered in how this school district, well, I shouldn't say the school district, because it's all public schools south of the river, looks going forward. So me, personally, Antoine, I'm hopeful that this is, we are fighting a fight in good faith. So I just wanted to share that, Chairman.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Poore. Dr. Guess. And before you, do we want to do that now? Okay, go ahead, Mr. Guess.
I thought we might be fixing to ask for a break there. I wasn't sure. No. It is a pleasure to be here before you, and I do want to welcome Mr. Poore here tonight. I'm honestly almost reluctant to say anything to you, but to answer your questions, because I think the passion and the words of Mr. Kouros, I can't do any better than that. It's obvious that he is a man, a patron, a citizen with great knowledge and great passion about what he has accepted a responsibility to do. I honor him. So much so that he's now been a superintendent. I'm going to see if we can't make him an honorary principal. You know, I think he needs to be a principal. I'm going to try to get the AAEA to make him a principal. But I'm going to make a few comments. Tomorrow is my 1,826th day in this job. I multiplied it a while ago. Tomorrow is the last day of my 5th year. I started July 1 of 11. It's been the best 5 years of my career. When I came here, people said, "You poor thing." And I can stand before you now and say, I would not have taken a gold monkey for it. And gold's high today. It has been a pleasure. When I got here, what I found was a district that I considered to be plagued by many problems. And I addressed the state board. I believe Dr. Barth was in that meeting. And what I told the board was specifically that it's my view that the desegregation money that has been here for 30 years was the worst thing that could have happened to PCSSD. And I suspect the worst thing that could have happened to Little Rock School District and the worst thing that could have happened to North Little Rock School District. Suffice it to say, when I got this job, I found the district mired in a culture of inefficiency, waste, and corruption. Now, that's nobody's fault. I'm not pointing fingers. I'm telling you that's simply what I found. I came from a district that had a sufficient budget, but a very tight budget. Every dollar had to be spent carefully. Every penny had to be accounted for. And what I found in PCSSD and the other districts was not that way. So for the past 5 years, I believe that we have been working to address the issues that I found to be at problem, and to make corrections in those and to put the district on a better course. I would remind you also that from all I know, many, many years ago, 30, 40, 50 years ago, 60 or 70 years ago, when these districts came together to form the PCSSD, and then through the various years of Pulaski County's existence, the district had an excellent reputation. It was recognized as a district of achievement and a district of success. The people in Jacksonville wanted to detach partly because at one time their Jacksonville schools were the best in the state. They had lost that luster, and they seek that luster again. And it's to their credit that they've chosen to take the course they've taken to try and recover that. I honor that. But I would also say that the last 30 years have created a culture, an atmosphere of chaos and litigation and dissatisfaction. And again, there's no reason to point any finger, but I think that has resulted in a loss of faith and trust in the districts here. Little Rock, North Little Rock, and Pulaski County were excellent school districts that had excellent reputations. Pulaski County was the largest district in the state. They served kids well. But through that 30 years of litigation and chaos, they lost that luster. I think Mr. McKenzie would tell you that through that 30 years, the population patterns changed here, and Cabot and Conway and Bryant and Benton grew because people left this metropolitan area to go to different school systems. Now, the reason that I say that is that I believe these districts need a time of stable, consistent operation. I think given the opportunity to survive as they are and to continue as they are, I think there is every reason to believe that they will recover the success and the luster that they had before. I can applaud Mr. Kouros. Little Rock is on that course dramatically. I can hope that Mr. Poor follows that same course. PCSSD in these 5 years we have made remarkable changes. We have spent tens of millions of dollars on facilities. We are the first district in the state to have a one-to-one computer initiative that is being carefully refined. We have done any number of things to return quality instruction and organization and efficient operation to the district. And I can tell you in the last 18 months, there's been a strong pressure on efficiency. The detachment of Jacksonville, which will cost us in terms of student aid about $40 million. The loss of desegregation money, which will cost over $20 million, has resulted in every decision being made to filter through how effective is this decision, how effective is this change, and is it one that we can afford? Is it one that we should do? We did not hesitate to spend nearly $10 million on a one-to-one computer initiative for our kids. The devices and the infrastructure are $10 million. We did not hesitate. The district had not bought buses for years. The fleet of buses that I found kept me awake at night worrying about the safety of the children. For 4 years now, we will have bought 20 buses a year. Now, these are only examples of how districts have to operate efficiently, and they have to operate carefully, and they have to operate with the kind of precision that Ms. Ariola pointed out in curriculum and in data-driven decision-making and in management. So what I would say to you is that I believe the districts need an opportunity to operate as the other 200-plus districts in the state operate. I would also say that questions have been asked about detachments. The Jacksonville detachment has been a challenge. Friday will be the first day of true Jacksonville operation. They've been in kind of an unusual limbo this year, a district but not a district, because we still had the financial responsibility to manage the resources at the same time that they sought their legs, and they've done a great job with that. But the detachment has been a great challenge, and that doesn't mean it can't be done again, and that doesn't mean it should not have been done. But I would also say that the Jacksonville detachment was a very unique set of circumstances. The detachment was in the interest of the Jacksonville people because for so long they had sought to regain the kind of quality educational program that they felt they had lost. They also had seen people leave their community and go to neighboring communities because of what they considered to be forces and factors that they could correct. So again, I applaud them for doing that. They detached to be able to build a new high school. They got a millage increase to do that. They're going to build a new elementary school with the help of the Department of Defense and district money. So that detachment served them well, but it also served PCSSD well. I can tell you that had I been the superintendent and a detachment of Western Little Rock had been discussed, I would have been vehemently opposed because the property value in Western Little Rock is the is the highest assessment in the district. The assessment in Maumelle and Sherwood are also proportionately higher than the assessment would have been, than the assessment is in Jacksonville. Had the detachment of other areas of the district been discussed, we would have opposed that because of the effect on the financial ability of the district to operate itself, sans the detachment. So the Jacksonville detachment was good for them and good for us. It has been a significant challenge, and we can talk about the minutia of that or the large picture. But I can tell you that probably the most significant challenge has to do with the bonded indebtedness. Now, we can divide buses, and we've done that. We can divide work trucks and all those computers and desks and all the other things. And we have had some painful times, folks, because we had to detach from there and non-renew over 600 people. But we have worked through that, and Jacksonville's working through that, and I believe most of those folks are going to get jobs. But the bonded indebtedness issue is another issue. In order to protect the tax-free nature of the bonds, we had a responsibility to have the fair market value, to establish the fair market value of the property in that district that is PCSSD. Now, it wasn't a token effort. You know, I didn't send somebody out with a ruler and a little green book and say, what do you think it's worth? We hired an appraisal firm. We had an appraisal that was carefully done by professionals, and we believe it would withstand an assessment by bondholders if they chose to do so. We had to establish the free market value to be able to protect the tax-free status of the bonds. So if a Sherwood area wanted to detach, they would have to buy their property. The millage in Jacksonville, because the property value in Jacksonville was relatively low, only about $10 million, even though the assessment is relatively low, they could raise enough money with a millage increase, which is the highest millage now in this area, to be able to buy the property. We hope to complete that transaction sometime in the next 2 or 3 weeks. But if you start talking about a millage increase in Maumelle to buy what would realistically be $100 million worth of buildings, that would take a substantial increase in property tax in millage to be able to buy those facilities. The same would be true in Sherwood. And I don't even want to think about what would happen in West Little Rock because, well, the buildings out there are not as good. That's actually some of the best, most highly assessed property in the district. But the detachment has been a labor of love. Tony Wood and many others, and I have, and people on both sides of the fence have worked very hard. And I believe that this Friday, we're going to wake up believing that we've done a good job, and PCSSD and Jacksonville will continue to support each other and be successful. But I can tell you that the detachment of other areas would be another matter in PCSSD's assessment, if in our opinion concerning supporting that. You talk about, you've talked about achievement and many other things. One of the other things that I have to say is I believe that Lakeview clearly established the state is the responsible party. The state is responsible for the education of its children. And the state is responsible to be sure that that educational opportunity is equitable and adequate for every student in the state. That includes instruction in the classrooms, and you all know that it even includes facilities. Jacksonville will benefit from 20-some-odd million, I believe, in partnership money to build their facilities because of their wealth index. So the state has a responsibility established by Lakeview concerning public education and the delivery of that public education. And I believe that the state has abandoned its responsibility to school boards to interpret that responsibility at a local level. Now, you may be saying, well, why are you getting into this when we're talking about PCSSD? But I think the issue is germane to this debate. I think the state's responsibility is to manage public education to the best benefit possible to all the kids in the state. Therefore, I question the wisdom of delegating that responsibility to school boards who then make those decisions based on factors other than what the state might consider to be important. I think I stand before you truly honored to have had the opportunity to do this job. But I can stand before you and tell you that the successes that I mentioned are not because of my great strengths and wisdom. Largely, it was the result of being able to act with my boss being the state commissioner, Dr. Kimbrell, Mr. Wood, and now Mr. Key. The decisions that PCSSD has made and the way that we have moved forward, I believe, has been the result of a management model unlike any that the state has seen before, in that we have been under this management for 5 years. And the progress that we have made, I think, is a result of that. Or at least that has a significant contribution to it. And the last thing that I would mention, or the next thing that I would mention, is to echo Mr. Couris's comments about charter schools. I think it's difficult, and Ms. Edwards probably, she mentioned parallel school systems, and since that was in my letter, that may be where she heard it, or it might be somewhere else. But I, again, do not agree that the state should embark on a course to provide parallel school systems to the students in the state. Because again, I think the state is ultimately responsible for the successful delivery of educational opportunity to all the kids in the state. It has occurred to me, I sit around and think about this stuff a lot, and it's occurred to me that there is a science concept that's somewhat comparable. Darwin's theory of survival of the species says that successful organisms will survive and they will change over years and become stronger. And as organisms change, those that are not successful become weaker. And over thousands or hundreds of thousands of years, evolution gradually changes species. Unless some significant event comes along and alters the landscape, and that event changes that species immediately. And in that case, the species dies or weakens to the extent that it's killed off. The way I have come to look at this is that the charter schools are taking, as Mr. Kouris said, the best and the brightest, the easiest to educate, the ones that are proficient or advanced, and moving them to an environment that leaves the most difficult students in the public schools. As he mentioned a while ago, the English language learner group, the number of students in special education, many of the other challenges that public schools face are challenges that we gladly accept, but in terms of our competition on a fair playing field, I think the point is that the changes that are occurring threaten the public education system, particularly in those communities where those changes are prevalent. I don't know if there's anything else that I can recall. Maybe that's enough. Do you have any questions of me?
Dr. Guest, we've had an opportunity to work together a lot over these last years, and you've done, I just got to say, you've done a wonderful job, not only with the school district, but as a previous speaker alluded to, the difficulty of the separation. Only those on the inside know how difficult that was, and you literally had to write the playbook to do that.
Thank you.
And you've done a wonderful job with that. Let me ask you the same question that I put to Mr. Poore. If we're going to hire a researcher to do research, what questions would you like to see answered that could benefit your school district?
Well, you know, I think I'd give Miss Areola a bonus and just take her. Because I think she knows the answers already. Mr. McKenzie, I'm not one to turn down an opportunity to get more data, as my friend Mr. Kouris says, and to make better decisions. The best and the brightest, the smartest, the hot dog in public education in the country, and I bet you she knows who that would be. Someone to come in with a fresh, unbiased objective and make some decisions. My comments are based on 39 years in the business. I believe that public schools have to have stability. You know, we don't need turmoil. There's enough trouble because some parents mad because the beans weren't properly cooked. And that's okay. That's the way it ought to be. We need to cook the beans right. We need to teach the classes right. The buses need to run on time and run well. We need to do all of that. And even in that environment, there will still be dissatisfaction that we have to overcome. The 30 years of turmoil here, and I agree with the reasons for this DSEG case. I understand completely why it was done, and agree with the need for it to have been done. And the turmoil that I refer to is not the result of my lack of respect for the complaints that were made and the agreement with the court, but it has been a fertile ground to keep people stirred up. And then you've got people moving out. And what Little Rock needs, I believe, is stability and consistency and long-term leadership and good people that Miss Areola defined running buildings and running classrooms. Did you hear her say that in her class she had 7 or 8 different levels of kids? Do you know how hard that is to do? She's planned in that class of 20 or 25 for seven or 8 different groups and talked to them all. That's an artist. That's what we need.
But certainly, we appreciate Ms. Areola, and hopefully we can schedule a work session with her to spend some quality time hashing all this stuff out. if we're going to do research, one of the things that I want to make sure we do is answer the questions that you as administrators need answered. So if you have, and I heard your call for stability loud and clear.
Right.
But if you think of something that, an area of research that would be particularly
Okay.
important to you, please let us know, because we're going to have to tell her so she can
Yes,
go out
sir.
and find that.
I understand.
That education ace to answer for us.
I understand.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you. Ms. Boyd, we're gonna ask if you could come back for our next meeting to present to us. And is it, unless,
I think it would, I think we got our appetite ahead of the size of our stomach about how much we could digest in one meeting. And this would give us an opportunity to put everything about charter schools in one package at the same time. And I apologize for making you wait through all of this, but I'm just about
what do you think,
saturated
Mr.
tonight.
Phillips?
Well, respectfully, I'm excited about what Ms. Boyd had to say. So I don't know if we need to vote on it. And I respect Jim and the will of the board, but maybe I'm not gonna say that, but I would suggest pressing forward.
All right.
But, pardon me, but I've got to take a quick break.
Well, maybe we take a short break.
Let's take 5 minutes, and then we'll meet and come back.
There's no whiskey in there.
Good? Yeah, okay. We good over there? Okay. Ms. Boyd, okay, sorry about that. Okay.
Are you ready?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Thank you all for having me. I appreciate y'all taking a break and coming back, because I drove from Nashville today to get here on time to present to you
my.
guys. So thank you. Thanks for having me
Thank you,
here.
Mr. Phillips.
And thank you. Thank you for your time and attention to the documents that we've provided you. I want to give like a 2-minute disclaimer and then like a 5-minute rundown. So my disclaimer is that I'm very passionate about school choice, and so if I seem overly passionate, I want you to know why. So when we talk about children who live in poverty, who need additional assistance, we're talking about the child that I was. So I grew up in a working class family. Sometimes we had consistent places to stay, sometimes we didn't. My parents made sure that I went to the best schools. They did this through creative choice, I'll say. Sometimes there were magnet programs. If they were there, we utilized them. Sometimes I had to double up and go live with my aunt because she stayed in a better area, so I could go to a better school if I lived with her. And then I'm also a product of the Arkansas School for Math and Science. So then the other part is I'm charged in my duty as the director of charter schools is to provide the community with information, to provide charter schools with technical assistance about how we can best serve our students. That's the disclaimer. I want to challenge the idea of this parallel system. I think many people have said today that the state is charged with educating students. We don't have parallel systems. We have one public education system. And I appreciate the fact that you guys are using the language that charters are public, and we need to continue to stress that. So, I mean, saying that we have a parallel system is like saying a district has a parallel system because they have more than one middle school with more than one leader in that school. That's not what we have. We have a public system that's striving to educate students. Instead of thinking about it as a parallel system, you might think about it as a puzzle. Right now, we don't have all the pieces to the puzzle. Charter schools are filling some of those pieces for students. We want to find the best fit for students to provide them the best education, and that's what they deserve. We want our students to be happy, healthy, and productive citizens when they finish their education. For some students, that takes place in the traditional venue. For some students, it takes place in the charter school. For some students, it takes place at home. But we want to provide those avenues for students to be as successful as they can. There's been a lot of talk about the high quality charter schools looking a certain way and not attracting certain students. I want you to think about this point. If I were a child today in Little Rock, if I was the poor black child that I was when I grew up in West Memphis, if I was in Little Rock, the only opportunity I would have to go to a school where all the students didn't basically look like me would be through a charter school. I wouldn't be able to easily access the intra-district choice because I've looked into it and it's a maze. It's hard to figure out how can I get my kid into a magnet school. It's not simple. With charter schools, most of them, you can go online, fill out an application, and you can get your kid into a different school. One thing I agree with that is a problem that you guys can solve or help us solve is that the transportation issue does keep some low-income students from accessing charter schools. I think that it would be wise to create a system that provides services to all students across the city and everybody pay their part into that system. Also, I think we should take note of people voting with their feet, so to speak. Parents are choosing these schools for a reason. There are wait lists for a reason. If they didn't want to go to these schools wouldn't be able to operate. They wouldn't have enough students, they wouldn't have enough money. Another thing is there's been a call for stability I would like to argue that you're never going to get stability in the public school system. We heard Dr. Arroyo talk about mobility of students. That's something that you're not going to have. With the funding formula, it changes every 2 years. We don't know what's going to be next time the legislature votes on it. We don't know. So I would just argue that the stability that everybody is calling for is ever fleeting. We're never going to have that. We have to do the best with what we have and continue moving forward doing that. I'll take any questions you have.
Mr. Phillips.
Well, let me first say I'm glad that we were able to accommodate you. We didn't realize you were traveling from Nashville, so I'm glad that we stayed to hear your presentation. I have a couple questions about your documents that you presented to us that I was able to read. Just want to make sure I understood one thing correctly. On the charter overview document, there was a kind of an annotation that says that there are no new charter operators expected to enter the bounds of the Little Rock School District prior to 2018, 2019.
Right.
Is that just based on, help me understand how you know that?
Yes, so that's based on that. We're in an application cycle right now. All of my open enrollment applications that I have on the books right now, none of them are in the Little Rock area.
And for the sake of the group and those watching, when is that deadline? When would that be final?
Right, so that's final now. No other people can apply for this upcoming, to open a school in August of 2017. No one else can apply for that at this time.
Okay. Does that include expansions or just new schools?
Just new charters.
All right. And this may not be a question for you. This may be a question for Commissioner Key in a statement. Personally, in light of the comments we heard today from the board members and from our some of our presenters, it's my opinion that for us to do our task, our charge, that at some point there must be time for us to do what we've been charged to do and not allow more of what has happened to continue to happen, because I think that undermines what we're doing. And to put it simply, I don't think there can be new charters and new or expansion while we're trying to decide how all these things work together. So, and I understand that may not be your decision, or it may be a group decision, and I think ultimately it rests with the commissioner, but I want to make it plain to my board members and to all in the room that I think for us to be effective in whatever it is that we end up, the recommendation end up being, I don't think it serves us well if there's continuing to be expansion or growth, because then whatever plan we are proposing doesn't seem to carry much weight.
Yeah, well, I would like to counter that and argue that that's something that you probably should prepare for. I mean, if you look at the recent history, that's what we have. We have charters entering Little Rock. We have charters expanding. So as you make your plan should have an accommodation to handle expansion.
Well, I understand what you're saying, but I'm saying until that, and I would go back at you and say that until that would be a part of our plan, I would hope.
Okay.
But until we get to that point to say how this looks, I think it would undermine, say, hey group, let's work a plan out on how traditional and charter schools should collaborate. Is that I think that's the term of the day today.
Right.
But then we're going to have more charter schools. And I'm like, well, we're trying to make a plan, but then there's more charter schools.
Right. So I would just urge you to keep the students in mind. So I don't think that it's appropriate to tell parents, we know you need a different option, and you told us you need a different option, but we want you to wait until we get this plan figured out before you can get that option, even though people are beating down the doors to provide that option to you.
Can I ask a question real quick? So is the expansion season closed?
The expansion season doesn't close. Charter schools can request expansions through amendment process to license and expand new campuses.
So at any point they can expand?
Mm-hmm.
What's the
Basically.
time frame on that?
So we accept amendment requests generally in October and February, and it's an ongoing process.
So there's no closing period of like say now in deadline of you know, a couple of months or 30 days, 40 days, 50 days?
They have to request it 35 days prior to the amendment request hearing so that the district superintendents can know to expect it. That's really the only time constraint that's on it.
Okay, I guess, okay, all right.
And I just want to state for the record, it's a lot of ways to frame this issue, but I don't want to be portrayed as a person that's saying that families can't send their kids where they want to go. And I don't want that to be out there. What I'm saying, again, for the clarity purposes, is that within this time frame that we're working with, I want us to be able to have legitimacy in what we're doing, in the time we're spending, the effort we're spending away from our kids, away from our jobs, that this is being done in good faith. And personally, my opinion is that if there is a different plan happening while we're making a plan, then this plan doesn't really mean anything.
I don't think that there's a different plan happening while you're making the plan. What I'm saying is that the plan needs to be dynamic. I mean, the structure of education is changing. The landscape of education is changing every day. And the plan should be built to accommodate that. That's all I'm saying.
And I can respect that.
Okay,
Thank you.
Any, Ms. Edwards?
I do have a question. So you said that, and thank you for being here. You said that there is never, that public schools will never get to stability, or there will never be stability in public schools. So that's total, so public charter schools and traditional public schools.
Right.
And what do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is that we can't control if people move or people stay. Right? So whether your children are moving to go to a charter school or they're moving to go to a different state, having stability in your district is really, you're asking for something that you can't control and that can't exist.
Well, unless Dr. Guest meant something different, I interpreted him to mean stability in leadership so that people would feel comfortable and recognize what they're getting in their district as it relates to leadership. Unless it's Dr. Getz, I guess he's left. I mean, unless I'm thinking of something different, I know that there probably won't be the kind of stability in which you are defining, which is why I wanted to know what you meant by stability, because I think there are two different definitions.
Right, and I would say that I agree with Dr. Guest.
Okay.
Leadership and stability is extremely important.
Okay.
Mr. McKenzie?
Yes, sir. Help me understand, I'm old enough to know that when we were talking about alternative education in Little Rock, we were talking about Catholic High School, and that was pretty much it. And so this whole concept of charter schools, I need to get a handle on. I think I know, but I need you to tell me, give me a little background on the rationale for the creation of charter schools, the whole issue of competition, and how that evolved, and then I think that's going to be critical to how we structure our recommendations.
Right. So in the documents I provided you, there is information on the legislative intent of the charter law. Just to give you some background, I mean, I really, so there are 6 things listed in the legislative intent: improve student learning, increasing opportunities, encouraging the use of innovative teaching, creating professional opportunities for teachers, provide parents and pupils with expanded choices, and hold schools established under the, hold the schools more accountable is basically the summary of the points. To this point, I just would like to express that school choice has always been available for people of means. If you have a certain amount of means, you can buy a house in a certain area and decide where your kids are going to go to school if you're relying on the public system in those catchment areas. If you have more than enough means, you could pay for an education through a private school, or you could have a stay-at-home mom or father who does homeschool. What charter schools do is they provide choices for people who may not have those means. Also, with a lot of our charter schools, especially here in Little Rock, what they do is they provide opportunities that might otherwise be missed. So, for example, we have Side Tech Charter School. They provide dropout recovery services. They help students who've already dropped out of high school, they get them back, they get them graduated. That's their mission. There's a school Exalt Academy in Southwest Little Rock. They're a college preparatory school. Their focus, their mission is to provide a rigorous education to low-income students and put them on the road to college prep. That's what they do. There are a number of different schools that have different themes and different programs. They have specific cultures, cultural environments. Some of them are just smaller and more intimate for students. So basically what they're doing is they're providing choice for parents who may or may not be of means, and they're providing different delivery methods for education. Does that answer your question?
Not really, but I think it's probably what I'm going to get tonight, so I'll go with that.
Well, if I can clarify, if you have a follow-up question, I'd be happy to clarify.
No, not tonight, thanks.
Okay.
Mr. Phillips.
I'm going to follow back up. I'm always cognizant of how I am portrayed. So I want to clarify, I think. Then I have a different question.
Okay.
One, I think it's clear where we are, like when I quote Jay-Z earlier, the world we know in Little Rock right now includes charters.
Right.
The world I see in Little Rock in the foreseeable future will include charters.
Right.
I understand in that principle, and I'm not here to undermine that or say that won't be the case.
Right.
So I just want to make that clear for the record and for the audience and for those on watching online.
Mm-hmm.
I do have a specific question about the statutes that were referenced in some of your materials, and I'm trying to get to which document. But it looks like under Arkansas Code 623, 301, and 302, to me that seems to be a disconnect in some things I've heard from other folks and what that statute said, and I hope you can help me clarify that. Under that statute, the charter facilities, the financial terms of the facilities the charter schools use must be disclosed to the authorizer, is the way I understood that, but there has been conversations in the past that information is not transparent. Is that information somewhere for the public to see?
Mm-hmm.
It is?
We have that information. So for the most part, before charter schools can take on any significant debt, they have to get approval through the ADE. So they send it to us. We have our finance department review it. We have our legal department review it, and then we issue a letter saying this is okay debt for you to take out. That usually includes facilities, things like buses, things that take a while to pay off. So we have that process. It's not something that we readily post online, but it is available.
I mean, so would it have to be like a FOIA request, or is it something that if I go through the ADE, when I say me, a person who's concerned about this issue would be able to access, or would it have to be something like a FOIA request?
It would be a FOIA request.
I think that's all the questions I have. Thank you, Ms. Moore.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Ms. Verity, and then we're going to go to Ms. Marshall.
Hi.
Hello.
Thank you for sticking around. I know it's late.
Same to you.
And I'm not sure if I've said this before, but I think the reason that I was nominated and asked to serve on this committee was because I'm a parent of a student who has a disability.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the questions I have is, from just glancing at the data, it seems as if students with disabilities are underrepresented in charters and overrepresented in traditional public schools, at least, or in particular, students who have significant support needs. And as someone who works in the disabilities field, and as someone who works with self-advocates, people who have disabilities, that kind of gives me pause,
Right.
because we fought really hard for our kids to be integrated and included across all settings. Could you speak a little bit about some of these disparities?
Definitely.
Thank you.
So from my experience, there are a couple of things at play. The longer that charter schools are in operation, the higher their rate of serving special education students increases. So the longer they've been in place, the more students they serve over time. I think part of that has to do with, and you might be able to speak this, the IEP process, the 504 process is an extensive process for parents to go through with their children and get the services that they need. Once you've got that process in place, it's hard to say, well, I'm going to uproot my kid and go to a school that's only been in existence for 2 years and go through that whole process with them again. So that's one thing. That's part of it. Another part of it is that if you look at, like you said, there are different categories of students with disabilities that are being serviced by charter schools. Charter schools actually serve a higher percentage of autistic students than the districts do. Another thing is that there are schools, the charter schools are prepared to serve students with special needs. I've personally seen schools adapt their building, adapt their pickup and drop off plan to accommodate students as needed. If the students are not opting into the schools can't serve them. So it's been my experience that the charters are prepared to serve them, but maybe parents are reluctant to opt into those programs before they know that they're established programs and that they're gonna work.
Okay. That's fair.
So, and I respect that that's your experience. My experience as someone who works in the field of disability advocacy has been the opposite of that. My experience has been that a student has applied to be accepted to a charter school, has been accepted, has gone for that first meeting to discuss the IEP, and has been told by the school that they can't be served at that campus.
That should never happen.
I agree. I agree. So do we know if that's happening as often as I have seen it happen, which is
Right,
quite
so
often?
our schools, charter schools go through the special education review process just like all other traditional public schools do. They can't waive any of statutes or rules that have to do with special education. If I'm contacted about problems, I go out and look for myself and figure it out. So it seems like you hear more about it than I do. If we do hear about it, if we do find it is something that we go in, we talk to them about it, and if they're doing something wrong, we train them out how to do it correctly. But that should not be happening. Everyone out there in the world, that should not be happening. If that happens to you, let us know, because that's unacceptable.
Any other questions? Ms. Marshall?
Just a clarifying question, please. I heard you refer to a financial partner when discussing an expansion of a school or establishment of a new charter. Is that correct? You go to your financial partner?
No, I don't believe I said that. I think the only thing I said about finances was that if a charter school wants to take out a significant amount of debt, it has to be approved by the ADE first.
Oh, perhaps I misheard you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I just have another question about the finances. There, as you know, there's been a lot of discussion in the public about financial transparency. Have there been FOIA requests made? Would it be directed to you, or would it be directed to someone else for that information?
Right, those can be directed to me.
Has that happened? I mean,
Not as long as I've been in my position. I can't recall that happening.
all right. Thank you again, Ms. Boyd.
You're welcome.
You know, I'm just trying to get the information for the public, because apparently a lot of people think this is an issue, and I think part of our job is we're a public education stakeholder group. So if that is available, the public needs to know it, and I would expect at some point you may be getting some. So.
Yeah, I'm ready for it.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. I'm a public servant. I'm here to serve the public, and I want the public to know what they need to know about how their dollars are being spent and how it's serving children.
That's great. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have no further questions, Chairman.
All right. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
At this time, we're going to open it up for public comments if we have anybody that wanted to speak. 3 minutes. Time limit on that.
Ms. Freno, did we have anyone sign up? she's working on that, we can work on our agenda for next week.
Okay.
next time.
While she's doing that, we're gonna work on an agenda for next week, and I would like to suggest to the group that we have maybe a study session, just to start.
Just a point of clarification, I know this, we have emails, but the charter operators, are they speaking at our next meeting or the
one out following
the July
25th.
25th meeting? Okay,
Yes.
all right.
And then I think that'll give us opportunity to kind of, especially get some more questions outlined for that meeting as well. Yes, ma'am. Ms. Verity.
So at that meeting, at our next meeting, we'll begin discussing the specific questions we want the research facilitator to
Yes.
address.
Yes,
Is that what-
along with that. And I think maybe if some other questions that we had, we can get ready for the next meeting on the 25th to give to the charter to be more specific in our questions.
I don't know if it's the right time, but I was just asking, is there possibly a right time? But listening to all the information that's gone on tonight, and certainly it's whatever your pleasure is, but there are definitely questions that are emerging that if we can get to the point where we have a good set of questions, we can really move this to the next step of gathering that other layer of information that I think you all are really asking for.
Okay,
So you would support a work session, am I understanding you correctly, Doctor?
I think it would be really helpful to clarify those questions. I mean, the first thing that came to mind as I was listening to this last bit was it's apparent that we need to know who's choicing in, why they're choicing in, who is not choicing in, why aren't they choicing in, what are those barriers? So this kind of dialogue is really helpful to us. It's helpful to think about these data questions. So whatever format we can do that in so that we can get a clear set of questions, we can move to a point where we can start to get the answers that you're hoping to get to move the work forward.
I think in saying that, I think it's probably the consensus of the whole board to make sure that we don't ever end in this position again as far as where we are now. And so, ever end in this position again. So with that being said, our next meeting is on July the 11th. And do we all agree on having a study session? Work session, sorry.
As long as that's not signaling that we feel that we have concluded
No, ma'am.
with opening
No, ma'am.
ourselves to additional information, I would like that made clear.
Yes, ma'am.
One of the things, I mean, we heard from the public school administrators tonight, but I'd like to ask the same questions to the charter school administrators. What would they like to see would benefit them from research as well? So, whether we need to get that asked and answered from the charter school guys before we have the work session or not, but, I think we definitely need a work session to get us caught up on some of the basics. One of the things I think that was clear to me is we're still struggling with exactly what our charge is and putting the elephant skeleton around the specific questions that the Board of Education ask us. And so I've kind of reframed that in plenaries to something about like developing a strategic plan for public education in Pulaski County, south of the river, and defining the respective roles of public and charter schools in that plan so that both are sustainable, fiscally sustainable, and stable and efficient in the delivery of those services, so that we address physical and facility challenges both for public and charter schools, that we address special needs students, whether they're disabled or not proficient in English or come from areas of concentrated poverty, and then finally define ways or make recommendations on how public and charter schools can collaborate to their mutual benefit. So, Dr. Barth, I hate to put you on the spot, but is that am I totally off track about what your intent was when you?
No, I think you were right on track in a lot of ways. And I think we know that these two systems are going to coexist, as Mr. Phillips said, in this ecosystem, and we need to figure out how they can both be healthy and sustainable. So I think you've begun to articulate that plan very well.
Okay.
So are we in agreement in possibly trying to start the process, but not ending the questions?
I think one more session will be enough to get us started. I'm not sure it'll be enough to get us finished, but at least we'll be we'll be moving on that track.
Okay. With that said, do I need to? Motion to adjourn this meeting. Motion.
So moved.
I
Second.
second that motion.
I third that.
Motion, Ms. Elwood. Second, Mr. Phillips. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.